Born in India and having grown up in Michigan, Shinoo Mapleton has had an exciting journey within the automotive industry. From sales and marketing to engineering and product development, Shinoo has worked with products dating back to the Pontiac Fiero and early days of 3M Clearbra products. He now serves as co-founder and co-owner of InoKinetic and Black Shadow Motors, which involves engineering, manufacturing, and distributing aftermarket parts for Lotus, while also orchestrating restorations of all makes and models. Shinoo's a busy guy, but he still makes time for a few car-inspired projects, such as a watch box for a standard H favorite watch brand. A few weeks back, I took a drive up to the Black Shadow offices in Temecula, where Shinoo and I chatted about his story. We talk about everything from Led Zeppelin to Volkswagen GTIs, a race car that he designed that got some heavy press, and the fact that new ideas often keep him up at night. This is a fun one for you car nuts. I'm your host, Wesley Smith, and you're listening to the Standard H Podcast. Shinoo, thanks for being on the show, man.
All right, Wes.
Yeah, it's good to see you again. It's been a while, I guess.
Absolutely.
Maybe 6 months since Cars and Coffee.
Yeah, I think at Secret Car Club, right? That's where we first met.
Yeah.
Michael.
So the way we start these things off is we usually talk about the history a little bit. So where are you from? Michigan, right?
Yeah, I was originally born in India, and I came to Detroit when I was 3.
Okay.
Grew up in Detroit, so lifelong car fanatic. My first memory is looking at cars, out my preschool window, cars running by on Warren Avenue. So
American-made cars, more than less.
yeah, for the most part, my dad had a series of American cars, but he also started buying, he bought a French car, Renault, and then he had German Volkswagens, and so. But as a car guy, and a kid, we were talking about Road and Track magazine. I mean, that was my Bible, and I memorized every stat in the back of those things. And I could, I was the little nerd kid who could pick out a car by its taillight from a mile away, right?
Yeah, it was kind of that way as well.
Yeah. So you know that problem, and so we so I love cars of all types. But yeah, Detroit, we had predominantly American cars. You know. And, I started my career at Pontiac Motors. So in 1985, I started working at Pontiac Fiero Assembly in Pontiac, Michigan. So that was, where I started in the industry, working as an engineering student, basically.
Sure.
I went to an engineering school that had a cooperative program from freshman year onwards. It's now called Kettering University.
Okay.
When I was there, it was called GMI. But 100-year, in fact, Kettering just celebrated 100-year anniversary last year. So it's been around for a long time. In fact, Mary Barra, who's now the CEO and chairman of GM, is a graduate, and I work for her at Fiero. Oh, no kidding. Yeah. So.
Well, just to rewind just a little bit, like when you were a kid, obviously you were noticing taillights and such, but what else were you into? Were you into music? We're sitting here in your office in Temecula, and you've got Jimmy Page and Robert Plant behind you. So you're obviously a Zeppelin guy.
Yeah.
Was that early on, or was that later? Or like, what were you into as a kid?
Oh, well, I mean, I was into sports. I played baseball, soccer. Once I discovered soccer, I was, that's all I was really interested in. But music for sure was, and still is a big passion of mine. Rock and roll for sure. I played the trumpet growing up, but then, once I got to high school, band was not exactly my thing. Partially because I just realized I was good, but I was never going to be great.
Okay.
So I would say that I'm a bit more of an aficionado. I DJ'd house music in the 80s, growing up in Detroit, but in school.
Like ska, so you're not playing horns in like a punk band.
Yeah, no. I never had the guts to join a band, but I definitely love music, and growing up listening to rock and roll for sure. But my dad loved Indian music, so we always had Indian music playing at home. Which, in those days, I don't know that I necessarily liked it that much, but now I certainly do.
Sure.
But disco was very influential for me too. I love that. So then, once I started getting into high school, of course, that new new wave was coming on, and alternative styles of music, and that was catching my interest. And
Or Bowie, or what were you into?
the Smiths, The Cure, Depeche Mode. I really started getting into industrial music, so bands like Ministry and Nitzareb, and like anything electronic really started catching my attention. So yeah, no, I mean, you can see my stack of records right over there, right? And so those are records that I've had since the set. My first albums, I got probably in the late '70s, early '80s, and I still have them. That Zeppelin album right there is probably the first Zeppelin one that I bought. Well, actually, the first, as I think about it, the first Zeppelin album I bought was Physical Graffiti on tape. But
Okay.
anyways, yeah, there's a big passion for music, in my life, and still is. And so, I loved the outdoors. Growing up in Michigan, I'm of that age where we ran all and played outdoors and rode our bikes everywhere and had fun in the fields, in the forests, fishing, camping. I was in Boy Scouts, so I just had, in my mind, a very idyllic, childhood, growing up there. I grew up in a city called Westland, Michigan, which was actually between Detroit and Ann Arbor. My dad was working in Detroit and going to grad school in Ann Arbor at Michigan, and so he picked Westland, and that's where we grew up, and it was a great place to live.
Now, what did your dad end up doing?
My dad was a physical therapist and health gerontologist, retired now, but still cranking away.
Still in Michigan?
No, he actually moved to Las Vegas when I was actually in college, mid-'80s, 86, 87, I think is when they moved. Okay. Yeah.
And then you studied what in college?
Mechanical engineering. Yeah, as my undergrad. Yep, that was my undergrad. And then, so I continued to work at Fiero until they closed the place in 1988. And at that school, we had to have a company that we worked for because in the fifth year, you wrote actually a thesis, still a bachelor's. But so I had to find another job, and I went to work for a 3M company in their automotive division. So I worked at 3M in Southfield, Michigan, and then they sent me to St. Paul, to really Stillwater, Minnesota, to finish my thesis. And when I completed that, my boss at the time hired me on, which was good because, the auto industry was in a slump, and jobs in Detroit were pretty slim to none. So I ended up staying in Minnesota and hired on there and lived in Minnesota through most of the 90s, working for 3M in their automotive division.
It's good for Twins baseball. Early 90s, at least.
Yeah, but it's funny. I though I had a love for baseball in early years, the last Major League Baseball game I went to, I still remember it, at the old Detroit Tiger Stadium. It was 1986. Season opener, I went to that, and I was bored silly. And I don't know why. I mean, I go to AAA games now, and I love it. But there was something about that experience that just kind of like left me with this taste in my mouth that I don't think I really want to go to see any more Major League Baseball games. But
that's hilarious.
Baseball, obviously is still, something I think is very cool. But I haven't been to a Major League game since.
Yeah, so that's been a while. What was your first car?
My first car, oh God, my first car really was a hand-me-down from my dad. It was a Renault, an R12 GTL. Probably one of the ugliest cars that you could own. It the front looked like the back. You didn't know if the car was coming or going. But it had 4 doors. It was red. It had a manual transmission and a great stereo in it. So yeah, I could get my friends in it. We could blast music and cruise down the road. So it was a fun car, but it broke all the time.
Oh, no.
So yeah, that's the first time I had to really start working on cars. And yeah, we were, in fact, I went to see Ozzy Osbourne. I think I was a senior in high school. And after the show, it was January or February, freezing. Went out to the parking structure, car would not start. of course, 1 a.m, or 12 or whenever the hell it was late, and underneath the car trying to get this fuel pump to fire up, and sure enough, just a loose wire. But not something you want to do at in Detroit.
You're from the idyllic upbringing.
yeah, exactly. But that car, it was exactly. It totally builds character.
Cool. So after college, then you're in Minnesota.
Minnesota, yes, and working for 3M. I went through a series of jobs there. 3M was a great company, very very innovative. I worked in manufacturing, advanced manufacturing originally. Then I moved back into the laboratory in product development.
So what kind of products were you developing?
We were doing all automotive things. A lot of products like striping on cars. That would be something people recognize. The clear bra films that now are ubiquitous out there, right?
Sure.
That was something that I worked on there. Some badging products, but we. So I was in the development side, and then also when I ended at 3M, I had moved over to filtration. So these cabin air filters, if you've seen those in a lot of modern cars. But that was, again, that was the late 90s at that point. But I had switched over. I'd finished an MBA and switched over into the marketing department and was in this I was in an international business development team where I was, a tech engineer, tech service engineer traveling throughout Asia. So I'd travel to all the Asian countries. Pretty much every other month, I would go for 2 to 3 week trips, all the major countries. 3M had subsidiaries there. I'd go there to train, engineers and salespeople and go make customer visits. It's mostly automotive, but also motorcycle.
Cool.
Yeah. But, then I left that group actually and joined the filtration group. And then from there, that's when I think it was 1998, left 3M. After 10 years there, it was a good run. But I had this itch I wanted to scratch, which was, have my own thing. And I had this headhunter calling me about a position down in Charlotte in North Carolina. So I took it, and it was with a company that actually made filtration material or media and gas phase or odor filtration media. And they needed someone to sell that to filter manufacturers like 3M for automotive. I mean, there's a couple different groups, but they wanted me to run the automotive side of the business. So I joined those guys and was down in Charlotte for a couple of years. So I had, in the 90s, the living in Minnesota, it was great because, people are very friendly and, that's when I really started to indulge my passion in cars and buy some cool cars and start doing track days. I didn't grow up racing. I always admired racing and loved racing, but had never really raced. So I had what got me into that was, my first new car. In fact, I should tell you, I had near the end of my college undergrad, I had an old Honda Civic, and it got rear-ended, and I needed to get a new car. And of course, as like most of us students, I was pretty broke, so I had $600 to buy a car, and I bought an old Saab, 1976 Saab 99. So it was a 5-door, and I could pile all my stuff in the car, my stereo, my mountain bike, my snowboard, because the school I was going to every 3 months, you went from school to work. So everything I owned, I kind of had to carry with me. And because my parents had moved, and so the Saab was just perfect for that.
Sure.
But at the end of its life, which when I was finishing my my thesis, the car basically developed either a blown head gasket or a cracked head. Because
all that long then?
Nah, about a year and a half. But every time I drove the car, I'd have to put water, into the radiator. And sure enough, you could tell Shinoo was coming because there was a big cloud of white smoke behind the car. but I was too broke to fix a thing, and I was about to graduate, and and so I knew I would be in a good place. But anyway, so I did graduate. My boss hired me actually before I graduated, as I think about it, and so then I was making a proper salary, and this new Volkswagen GTI was coming, which had the round headlights. So these were the A2s, right? And it was a 1991 model, and it was like the Euro style lights that we hadn't gotten before. So I love that, and so I ordered it, but it was not going to arrive until the fall. So there it was, the spring, and I have this broken down Saab, and I'm thinking, all right, what am I going to do? And I had just ridden a motorcycle for the first time the previous summer, and knew that a motorcycle had to be in my future. So I went out and bought a motorcycle. I got rid of the Saab, bought a Suzuki, and rode that until the GTI arrived. So all summer long, rain, sun, you had to be prepared for that. But when you're at that age, you'll do whatever. So I rode a motorcycle all summer and into the fall until the GTI arrived. So, yeah, that was the first cool car that I say that I owned, and then of course I started changing the car, right, modifying it, different wheels, different steering wheel, strut tower brace, intake, all this kind of stuff that we do, stereo. But then a couple years later, I got this really good deal on a new E36 325i BMW, and it was rear-wheel drive, which all of a sudden the handling, the feeling from driving that car was something pretty amazing. And so I bought that thing, sold the GTI, and joined the BMW CCA. And that was my introduction to track days and driving on Brainerd International. That's a really fun track. It's like this 1 mile front straight, goes into a really fast, sweeper. So that car, I ended up, of course, modifying that thing, putting Dynan suspension on it, and I put M3 wheels, forged wheels on it, and, of course, a Dynan chip and exhaust. Actually, I think on that one, I had put a B&B tri-flow exhaust, and it was loud as hell, and it droned terribly, Oh my God, and that's when I realized, okay, drone is something I cannot live with ever again.
Right.
So after that car, we had moved to Minnesota, to Charlotte, and I bought a 911. Yeah, I bought a 993, and I had a lifelong love for Porsche and 911s in particular. So I had actually started the savings fund, and I called it my 911 fund. Right. Yeah, and we had got to that point, and I thought, all right, I'm gonna buy this 911, and it was 3 years old, and so the price had deflated a bit, and bought it and loved that car. Have some fond trips in that. Like I had my first daughter was born, and I have a great memory of her sitting in the back, my helmet next to her, my wife in the passenger seat. We went from Charlotte down to Atlanta. I dropped those two off at my wife's friends, and I went to Talladega and raced the car around the track.
Road Atlanta, but oh wow.
Yeah, so it was a PCA event down there, and it was on Little Talladega. So there's a small, what was a former motorcycle track. So it was pretty tight and small course, and it was perfect. I remember it was pouring rain, and I was sweating bullets. I was like, man, it's my first mid-engine or rear-engine car, really. And, I was always kind of a little apprehensive about this whole lift throttle oversteer issue, right?
The hammerhead.
Just coming around, right, and spinning on you, right? And so, even though I had done quite a few track days with the BMW previous, this was the first rear-engine car for me. So I went there, and then it's raining, so you're feeling, oh my God, the rain, it's going to be slippery. But as it turns out, the rain is one of the best things that could happen to you because the speeds come down. So now all of a sudden, as the car is getting loose underneath you, you're not going at Mach 1. You're going at a reasonable speed,
right?
And so your reaction times don't need to be lightning quick, right? And so all of a sudden, by midday, I'm lifting off throttle to tighten my, line through a corner, controlling the car as it's moving underneath me. So it was the best thing. It was the best thing that could have happened. So yeah, that car was a lot of fun. I really, really enjoyed that car. And funny thing is and we had a second kid, and somehow I got in my head that I needed a second practical car. We already had a wagon. I had a 94 E320 wagon that my wife drove. And, but somehow I convinced myself I needed another practical car that I could get the entire family in. So that this Porsche was just impractical. And so I bought, an E36 M3 new. And, I definitely had a fondness for BMWs and the M3s in particular. And I could get both my kids in there with their car seats, right? It was still in an era before these monstrosity car seats that exist today.
Right.
But the car seats still took some room. And it was funny, like on that Porsche, I actually got car seats from Europe because the car seats in the U.S. I just could not fit in the back of the Porsche. But in Europe, I was able to get them there. And with that job that I was in there, I was traveling quite a bit to Europe. I actually had an office in Wiesbaden in Germany. And so on one of those trips, I actually picked up a car seat and brought it back. And so that's the extent of my madness, buying car seats in other countries and bringing them back so I can make my car work, right? So, but ultimately, I went to this M3 and it was sold the 911, and it's funny, I sold it for what I paid for, and that was before the values of these 993s just went crazy, I think if I still owned that car, I could probably sell it for what I had paid even now with miles on it and everything. But yeah, that was the first time actually that I ever had a car that I bought and sold for essentially the same amount of money. I was always the guy buying cars, and it would just depreciate, and you just lose your ass on it, and off it goes.
All right,
that's normal, exactly. So
what brought you to California?
We had our second kid, and my in-laws were living out here, and my father-in-law was dying of emphysema. And we had come out to visit. In fact, it was 20 years ago for Christmas. And, I looked at the situation. I just said, look, this guy, who I liked and had never actually lived anywhere close to, he was a Korean War vet and very much a man's man, and so I really enjoyed being around him. But more importantly, we had two kids at that point, and I realized, I grew up with family around me, and my parents were in Vegas, so that was pretty close, and my siblings were there, or close by, and so I thought, we need to be closer to family. We're just at that point in our life, in that phase in our life where our kids need to be closer, and they need to see their family, more frequently.
Sure.
And in particular, not knowing how many days or years, that Andy had left, I felt like, we needed to be out here. So kind of said to my wife, I'm like, Stace, we need to move. And she agreed. And 3 months later or 4 months later, we moved out here. So so we've been out here since April of 2000.
So you settled
in Temecula.
Okay,
yeah.
so you've been here for 20 years.
Yeah. It's amazing, really. I mean, we rented a house for a year while we were trying to figure out where to live, and we had a house in Charlotte that needed to sell, and that took a few months. And then we built a house over here, and we moved into that house, and it's amazing. I'm in the same house, and frankly, it's great. It's 3 miles from my office here, and that's when I decided to start my own business, and so that's the point at which I decided to get out of corporate America after 15 years and try this whole entrepreneurship thing. For me, it was that itch I had to scratch, right? And I didn't know whether I was cut out for it, because when you're in corporate America, in particular, like when I left 3M, I had just started getting stock options, and I don't want to do the math on what those damn stock options would be worth today, but I certainly gave up a lot of money, moving, or leaving that company. But, for me, it was, this having my own business or starting things, was something I needed to try. And at 3M, it was almost somewhat, like I worked on product development, marketing new products, innovation. So I was really kind of cut my teeth in an environment that really facilitated or promoted that kind of mindset, product creation, if you will, looking at problems and solving those. I mean, as engineers, that's what we're trained to do, is solve problems all day long. But this desire to have my own thing kind of came from that. And so I started a business, and in these last 20 years, there's been, multiple businesses that I've started, some of which I've had to shut down, others that I've sold, and others, and then new ones that I've started, and so it's been a fun ride. And there's certainly you could say the grass is always greener, but there are pros and cons, and the lack of overall security as an entrepreneur is probably one of the biggest cons, but one of the big pros is your ability to do things the way you want. And for me, not having to deal with corporate politics was certainly something that I definitely liked.
Just for sure.
Yeah. And
so what was the first business you started?
First company I started was Filter Market. We were basically selling high-efficiency air filters. And my intention was to sell the 3M products because they had a good brand, and it was something I was very familiar with. And with the cabin air filter market, I knew quite well. I thought the aftermarket on that would build. But 3M actually ended up exiting that space, but they continued to sell their home furnace filters. So we ended up selling those, and our really what made us kind of compelling is that we carried a bunch of unusual sizes, the ones that you couldn't get at Home Depot, where you could find these filters. And so we ended up building, a lot of, this customer database of people with unusual filter sizes all over the country.
How did you build that database?
Well, we had a website, and we actually advertised. 3M would send us referrals. It was early days of e-commerce, if you will, but people would find us. And
ads that you were doing, or were they print?
Online, keyword stuff, and spent a lot of money, wasted a lot of money doing a lot of online advertising that didn't pan out, but in the end, filters are like razor blades, right? They're a consumable. So the repeat business was real key for us. And at the time, I had created this thing I called the Minder system, where we would automatically send you filters, and clients would sign up for that. And so that worked out really well for us. But the funny thing that actually really worked, the biggest fundamental shift that we made to that business, is we offered free shipping if you bought a case of filters. And just like that, our average filter sale went from 4 filters to 6 filters. Just to get free shipping, people would spend the extra money. And it was kind of interesting when we looked at our data, and you could see the minute we flipped the switch and started offering the free shipping, our average sale just jumped.
Right.
And using data to kind of look at that, and it was pretty clear that, the consumer or our client behavior was definitely affected by, free shipping.
Are you a watch collector but having trouble finding something cool and unique? I mean, the last thing you really want is what everyone else has, right? Well, this is where my friend and former Standard Age podcast guest Tim Jackson comes in. He and his wife Jana own Passion Fine Jewelry in Solana Beach, California, where you'll find an incredible assortment of independent watches waiting for you in their shop and online. And if you're getting engaged, have an anniversary coming up, or simply have another reason to buy jewelry, they have you covered. Passion Fine Jewelry also employs a goldsmith on staff for any custom desires, so you're able to go that route if you so choose. Visit Passion Fine Jewelry when you find yourself in Southern California, but they're also open 24 hours a day at passionfinejewelry.com. You can also find a wealth of information through Tim's blog, independentintime.com, where he covers anything independent watchmaking related, among a plethora of other information, so check that out as well. I've really enjoyed creating these podcasts on behalf of Standard H and sharing each of these personal stories with all of you. We each have goals, and it's the entrepreneurial spirit that inspired me to start the company. You can further support the brand and the podcast by visiting standard-h.com to pick up your choice of merchandise, and as always, thank you for listening. Lastly, if you have a moment, please rate and review the show. It makes a tremendous difference in keeping these things going. Now back to my conversation with Shinoo. And so did that business, you sold that business? Or?
Yep, we sold that business. We actually got into some commercial business with that. We actually were supplying a lot of green buildings in New York City. This is the early days.
LEED certification.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we were members of the U.S. Green Building Council. In fact, I don't know if I got a folder down there, but yeah, so we were early members of that. And, in fact, I went to the first Green Build conference, and so but we supplied a number of the green, buildings. In fact, the first platinum building in New York City, we were supplying. Okay. Yeah. And so that was an interesting business. But what happened, probably a couple of years after starting that, I started my first real automotive business. And it prompted, it actually came from the fact that I had a Lotus Elise on order. This Lotus Elise was introduced in the mid to late 90s, the Series 1 cars, and I was enraptured with the thing. It was what I felt was my dream car.
So what drove that? Was it the standard equation of power to weight ratio, or was it the design, or
yeah,
what?
I mean, really a combination of all of those things. I mean, Lotus as a brand, I loved, their F1, victories, the Esprit, the cool cars that company made, and I know Lotus guys cringe when I say this, but it's true, and that is there is a connection between the Fiero and the Elise.
I see.
And I can't say that that's what drove me towards it. What truly drove me towards it was my love for driver's cars and my love for motorcycles. So I had owned a Ducati. I still do now, but this was a different one at the time. And so the engineering innovation in the Elise, absolutely sparked my engineering interest. The design of the car itself was also really cool. Very Dino-esque. You can see some of the influences there. But the fact that it was a pure driver's car, that was just very, very exciting to me. And when they introduced it, I remember I was at the SAE show, Society of Automotive Engineers show in Detroit, mid-90s, and the manufacturer of the chassis had one on display. And these, they're aluminum extrusions that they glue together and rivet. And I remember asking him, I said, hey, how long is that going to last? Does it have the durability? And he goes, we think it's going to last 100,000 miles, but we really don't know. We've run it through a lot of tests, but we don't really know. So I love the fact that chassis was very creative. The engineering behind it was very innovative. It was a 150-pound chassis. It was amazing, right? And so that kind of thing was especially exciting to me. And so when they finally announced that they're going to bring a Series 2 car to the U.S., I got on the wait list. So that was... I put money down for that car, and it was funny thing is I actually had money down for the GT3, the first iteration of GT3 911s that were being sold in the U.S. And I took that deposit back from the Porsche dealer, and I put it down at the Lotus dealer because the Lotus was more of what I wanted, which was more pure, lighter still. I had owned a 911 already, so I wanted to have something. I had never owned a Lotus at that point. Different experience, and so I wanted to go down that path and try that. And so, like with every Lotus, there's always delays after delay after delay. And so anyhow, I decided, as I was looking around, there's nobody doing any aftermarket, parts. And I had changed every car that I had owned, since the GTI with aftermarket accessories, for track days, or for styling, or whatever fancied me at the moment, right?
So is that driven also by your, I guess, inclination to make it better, Or was that your inclination to just make it your own? Or is it a combination of both?
Yeah, it's probably a combination of both. I mean, I've always been, I think, somewhat independent minded and thinking, to the annoyance of my friends and family, maybe, but I don't typically listen.
Identify with this.
Yeah. And so I didn't necessarily listen to the same music that, other people were listening to, or, like the things that other people, even the cars, right? And so, even though Porsche or BMW are the natural performance and enthusiast, marks, which I owned, I was kind of interested in that, the Lotus, which is a bit more eccentric, if you will. So for me, making it my own was definitely a key piece. When I was a kid, I'd buy, old beat up bicycles and fix them up and sell them because I could do that. I was mechanically inclined enough, and I would paint them and fix them up and sell them, and I would make it the way I wanted to make it, and they would sell, and what was I making, $20 or something on a bike or something? But I've always wanted to make things the way I wanted it, and I've always had a very keen interest in design and how things are styled or looked. In fact, before I decided to go into engineering, I was actually also contemplating, becoming an architect instead. So I've loved architecture and design, since young, since I was in high school as well. And so, yeah, so styling, but performance in particular, having gone to the racetrack and driven, especially with BMW CCA and PCA, I could see where, a street-driven car kind of comes up short in certain situations, whether it's safety or performance. And I could see those trade-offs, right? And so, as an engineer who's just focused on trying to solve problems, it just opened up a new world of excitement. And so for me, to create a company that would make aftermarket accessories for the Elise, that was something I was absolutely excited about, because I knew I could do it. All my best friends are in the automotive industry, and I felt like, I had enough experience having tuned these various cars that that I have enough ideas and can typically identify the things that I would change. And, but yeah, so, since then I've developed hundreds of parts for the Elise and Exige and Evora. And, some of them are lifestyle products, some of them are styling products, but many of them are performance products, and some of those are designed, strictly for track use. Others are just designed to make the car better on the street. One of our latest innovations is an exhaust system that doesn't drone at all, from that terrible experience with my 325. I said, I just cannot stand droning exhausts. And so we, came up with a muffler that's got a Helmholtz chamber. And so it doesn't drone when you're on the freeway, but it shrieks when you're on cam, and it just sounds great. So yeah, my desire to, make things better, but also to try to make it, what I wanted as an individual, kind of drove that.
Sure. And then today you've got basically an umbrella company.
Yeah, so InoKinetic is our kind of parent company that we have created to really focus on parts, and we've done parts, for various cars. And one thing, I've even been in rock crawling. We had parts. We had a business called Rev 111. We were doing rock, for Jeeps, for TJs, and the JKs had just come out. So we've done parts for all sorts of stuff. For Pontiac Solstice, Saturn Sky, Mini Coopers. So over the years, we've done, parts for various cars. And so like with InoKinetic, we said, all right, well, what else can we do? And we started doing some stuff for Teslas, like the Model S. We have 2-piece brake rotors that are super lightweight. We felt unsprung weight savings can help. And, we do these super lightweight BBS forged wheels for the new Ford GT that are as light as the carbon fiber wheels. So with InoKinetic, we've developed and sell a bunch of these parts, mostly for Lotus, but for a few other makes as well. But we also do engineering for other companies, and have most of who want to keep things pretty discreet and quiet. So we have confidentiality and non-disclosures, with them. But we've just recently finished a design of a shifter mechanism for a boutique car manufacturer, and it's a mid-engine sports car that will be coming out in the near future. So that's really cool. We've even done things like and manufacture a really cool watch box for a cool brand that's out there doing a really nice watch. But other things that we have in the wings from an engineering perspective. But under this umbrella with InoKinetic, we have another brand we call Black Shadow Motors, which we actually came up with that name from the Vincent Black Shadow. So for any of you motorcycle guys out there, the Vincent was our inspiration for that name. I just happened to Google Black Shadow Motors and saw that nobody had actually locked down that URL. So GoDaddy, $19 later, or whatever it was, and bang, we had it,
Yeah.
So with Black Shadow Motors, we basically are selling niche vehicles. We're servicing cars, mostly Lotuses, but we're expanding beyond that. And then we're doing restoration. And that's been a big focus for me the last couple of years. It's very similar to building race cars like we've done, or I guess I haven't talked about the Draken, which was a car that we developed. But restoring cars it's a very similar process, but it's something that we have, and our shop is about 5 times bigger than what I had before now. And so I think I counted the other day, I think there's 14 Lotuses in here, but in restoration, I think we've got somewhere in the neighborhood of about 10 cars, in underway, and more coming in. So we're pretty excited about that. We've got a paint booth in house. Our restoration specialist, he's a hammer and dolly guy, so he does metal work the old-fashioned way. But he's also very good at composites. And so, in fact, last year we built a Lotus we call the 111 RS Spider that started life as an Exige and had rolled over on a racetrack, so we had to fix every body panel or repair it or replace it. And we painted it in-house and made it into a Spider. So we cut the windshield down and super light, and just it's got all of our tricks on it, all of our cool parts. And we took it to the West Coast Lotus Meet last spring and won Best of Show. So that was cool. That was a big surprise because they typically give that award to really stock cars.
Yeah, nothing updated or changed.
Nothing as wild as we showed up with. So it was a bit of a surprise, but that was cool. It just kind of showed the community, was excited about what we had to do with Lotuses. But over the years we've built all sorts of interesting Lotuses. We've done a couple of art cars where we hired really cool artists, and this guy Neil Ratnavira to paint, much in the same way that the BMW art cars have been done. Now, of course, BMW has very famous artists who I'm sure demanded a lot of money. We didn't have that kind of money, and though our artist is maybe not as famous, he's certainly as talented as some of the guys I think that BMW employed. But
sure,
Neil did a great job on both of our cars. Our first car, we actually campaigned that in Lotus Cup, and we set track records that took years for the rest of the racers to beat. In fact, I mean, the record that we set at Buttonwillow stood for like 2 years.
Wow.
Yeah, we set that with an Elise, and but it had all of our cool parts on it, and we certainly had a fantastic driver, Glenn. If you're hearing this, you're awesome, man. And so, but that was years ago, and those kind of cars that we built were just fun to do, and we learned a lot of things from that. And when they say that, you do learn from racing, and some of that, the things that you learn can trickle down into other things that you do, but we.
What's one of the larger lessons you learned?
Well, that's the lightweight nature of the Lotuses on the track in particular are much easier on the consumables. So we built these 2-piece brake rotors with this great company, Girodisc, back in 05-06, and it's still the gold standard today. We made them so good that they last for, by track day standards, forever. People are getting 50, 60 track days out of these brake rotors. And, the thing that we learned is sometimes you can overbuild things, right? And Colin Chapman, who was the founder of Lotus, his philosophy was if the car breaks as it crosses the finish line, he did a perfect job of engineering it, right? So lasts just long enough to finish a race. I think with our brake rotors, we certainly went in the other direction. We kind of followed, I think, the Porsche philosophy of building it for endurance, but we didn't do that going in. It's just the nature of a light car means that it's going to be less aggressive on certain components that on a heavier car would be used up pretty quickly.
Sure.
Well,
you were nice enough to give me a little tour of the factory or the showroom.
Yeah.
And well, I guess it is a factory, in all fairness.
Yeah, our shop. Yeah, sure.
The shop.
I don't think of it as a factory, but yeah.
But yeah, the shop. You kind of gave me a little bit of a background as to how InoKinetic started. Can you go into that with like your business partners and such? Like, what were you doing before, and how did this begin?
Yeah, so we developed a car called the Draken, and it's a mid-engine chromoly tube chassis based car with an LS3 in the back, and actually used a 911 gearbox. So just a pure driver's car, 2,000 pounds, 430 horsepower V8, naturally aspirated, rear drive, no driver's aids whatsoever. So pure driver's car, right? Like the kind of cars that I like. And it all stemmed from, again, this just obsession with these lightweight cars. Started with the Lotuses, and then I bought an Ariel Atom, and that got me, put me down this road of these crazy lightweight cars. We started importing the BAC Mono. We were the first importer of that car, and we used to fully assemble them in our shop. And so the Draken kind of stemmed from all of that. We wanted to create a car that had an American V8 in it. All these other boutique cars that we were dealing with had 4-cylinder engines, which are cool, and I love them. But we saw kind of a niche opening up where there were some potential clients who just could not get their heads wrapped around driving a car with a 4-cylinder, even though the power to weight ratio was awesome and beyond, frankly, some of their skill sets. So I saw that market, where building a V8 would be smart, because there's some people that's what they got to have, that no replacement for displacement kind of mindset, right? And so, plus the fact that these 4-cylinder engines that were in these cars, like Ariels and the BACs, were not emissions compliant. And so in some states, we were totally shut out of being able to register them. In other states, you can register them as kit cars. So GM was building this E-Rod, still does, this crate motor that is emissions compliant. So we thought, hey, what could we build with that? So the Draken was really the kind of product that came from that thinking, that we wanted to create a simple American car with American muscle in it, but it embodied all the elements of a pure lightweight driver's car. And so we created this car, and, I wanted to see, I knew I had enough money to build a few of them. And so I kind of stuck my neck and put everything on the line and did this car, and it nearly killed me for sure financially, but we showed that we could build a really cool car and that people would like it and that it worked well. And we were in Auto Week, and we were on Leno's Garage, and Matt Farah drove it, and the editors, Motor Trend drove it, and so we got a lot of really good feedback, and customers bought it, and they loved the car, but it used everything that I had financially. Building a car is a very expensive undertaking, and the passion that we have as car guys sometimes overwhelms our good sense, good, prudent financial sense for sure. And probably the certainly, as an entrepreneur, the one thing that I've learned is you do need to watch, the way you do spend your money. And maybe it was the 10 years I spent at 3M where R&D, we spent money like crazy. But it was because we had other parts of the business that were making lots of money, right? And so I didn't quite get that piece of it, right? And so for me, R&D was just kind of like breathing for me. Coming up with new products was something that I just did. And so this car, which would intimidate most people, like, or building a car, I just kind of just went for it, right? There's this leap of faith, and some of it comes from being, frankly, naive, but other parts of it just come from being reckless, right? And
just
it's
bullheadish.
yeah, you're like, I can do this. I can figure this out. I'm gonna make this work. And it's not driven by money as far as like this desire to become this, millionaire, trillionaire, gazillionaire kind of thing. It didn't come from that place for me, and right or wrong, that's just the truth. And but the net result of that is that you go maybe further than you can really, pull off. But I knew that I could get it to a certain point, and I needed to go find, some investors. And so, I talked to just dozens and dozens and dozens of companies, investors, people, groups, VCs. But the truth of the matter is, most of these folks don't look at automotive in the same manner as they do maybe some social media or other businesses that Silicon Valley goes nuts over. So it was a pretty tough slog trying to find the right people, but amazingly, at my CrossFit gym, one of my buddies that I became friends with there, he and his dad had a business where they invested in small businesses and helped them grow. And they're both car guys, and motorcycle guys, so we hit it off really well. And we joined up, and they looked at how I was running the business, and they said, Shinoo, you're doing a great job as far as customers are concerned, and your products are awesome, the quality is great, but you're really just breaking even, and that's not the way to run a business. And so I kind of looked at him and said, yeah, I guess you're right, but what's wrong with breaking even? And so they clearly showed to me that to really build a sustainable business, you have to make money that you can use on a rainy day. And so it's funny, 10 years ago when the economy melted, I lost probably 30-40% of my revenue just like almost within a couple of months.
Sure, because
right?
of the nature of the business.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, I was selling things that nobody really needed, like it's all discretionary spending stuff, right? And I kept innovating, I kept coming out with new things, and so we clawed some of that business back, but we did it at the sacrifice of margin for sure, which was already thin. So, these guys, the medicine that they were administering me was a tough pill to swallow, right? But it was the smart pill to swallow. And I was at a point where I felt like, okay, what they're telling me makes sense. And I got to give this a shot. I've tried everything else, and the results have always been the same. So, the let me try to follow their financial advice, and let's structure this in that manner.
So what were some of the things that changed?
Selling products that other manufacturers had developed that have thin margins. That, it's an easy way to get into a space selling other people's products, but inevitably you're given pretty thin margins. And there's certainly some, like we were selling things from some manufacturers overseas in England, I'll just say, that had very thin margins. And we realized that though we were selling, these products, in the end, we truly weren't making any money because the amount of time and effort it took to deal with that, that supplier and
import duties, I'm sure,
all of that, quality issues, timing, the lead time, all this stuff, you send the money and then you wait, weeks and weeks to get your stuff. So now your money's hung up there. And, so that was a fundamental shift that we made. And we basically, stopped selling certain products and started to kind of just more focus on the things that we had developed ourselves that we get manufactured here. Some of our products are manufactured overseas as well. But that gave us a bit more control and, frankly, gave us a bit more margin. I mean, it's still automotive margins here. You know, we are still selling car parts in the end, but now, you know, we've got some more margins that are far more sustainable that allow us to have the cash flow to really support a business.
Sure.
Yeah.
So what are the kind of brass tacks operations that you guys do now?
As far as
like what does the business consist of these days?
Yeah, we're selling parts. So, you know, we got thousands of customers all over the world that we're shipping stuff to, mostly in North America.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, we got clients all over Europe, all over Asia, Middle East. And these are all, you know, mostly Lotus enthusiasts, you know. But then we also are doing the engineering services for certain companies. And we're servicing cars, mostly Lotus, but we're expanding beyond Lotus now. And we're selling some of these niche cars. So we've been buying used Lotuses in particular and refurbishing them so that they're kind of mechanically like new. But since we have a body and paint man and a paint booth, we also are refurbishing them cosmetically. So now someone who couldn't buy a Lotus Elise new 10 years ago because they were still in school or whatever the issue is, they could now buy a car that's been basically reconditioned by us to a standard that's way better than pretty much most of the cars being sold by private parties.
Yeah.
You know, and certainly better than most of the cars being sold by used car dealers.
Right.
So, you know, I love this car. I believe it's a platform that's got long legs. You know, I think 20 years from now, 40 years from now, people will still be driving these cars and enjoying, you know, having, you know, getting the pleasure of driving them as sports cars. So, you know, even with autonomous vehicles on their way, I think that private tracks will still be out there. And I think we still have big stretches of road in remote places in this country that I think we'll still be able to have some fun in. But so I think, you know, people are still going to love those cars, you know, because all these modern cars are becoming so heavy, so electronic, so many computer controlled devices to kind of filter the fun factor, you know, the response, the feel that you get from driving. So we're selling those cars for that reason, because I feel like they are really one of the last cars that still give you that feeling. And then the restoration side that we talked about earlier is becoming a really big and important part of our business now. And, you know, again, it stems from the fact that building cars like the Draken or BAC Mono or a race car, race Lotus, you know, the work that you do in doing those things is quite similar to the restoration side. But there's, you know, some tricks there that we that we've employed to just make sure that we keep the cash flowing, because restoration can also be it's got a lot of, you know, financial pitfalls in it too. And so we've kind of put some guidelines in place there to keep ourselves from getting in too deep and drying up cash flow too quickly. So, I mean, as a simple example, we bill every 2 weeks. So whatever work, you know, the labor, the materials, client gets an invoice every 2 weeks. And that allows us to keep the guys paid and the lights on and all of what needs to happen in a business.
Sure.
And, you know, that's a fundamental shift compared to a lot of shops where they'll go months without, you know, getting really paid for the work that they've done.
Right, just whenever it's completed. Yeah. So, what are you driving these days? Like, what's fun for you?
So, you know, I got a Ducati I keep here at the shop, and, you know, that's my, you know, weekend. I just get on it. We have this fantastic road that's right, we're at the base of that road. So I'll go ride my Ducati up in there. But I have a Lotus, you know, Elise that's modified heavily with all of our stuff. That's really my go-to fun car. You know, I live 3 miles away, so I drive a EV and a hybrid, you know. Frankly, I love the fact that I don't have to go to the gas station. I love the silent running and the fact that I got Bluetooth and I can make phone calls in the car. But my fun comes from the Lotus, comes from the Ducati. You know, we represent a brand called Vool. It's a Mexican brand, and they have a fantastic little 2-seat roadster. So we have one of those as a demo. We had a client track day at Spring Mountain. You know, we've got a small race shop there. I've been a member there for, I don't know, 10 years it feels like now. And so I was just at the track a couple weekends ago. So, yeah, I mean, those are the cars that I get the most fun from. But, we have a G-Wagon here that's a two-door soft top Wolf, from this company, Expedition Motor Vehicles. That's also super cool to drive. And it's a manual transmission diesel. So it's slow as molasses. But
it's like an old Defender.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And, I mean, but it'll crawl over anything.
Yeah.
I took it out to a rally, last year. It was just cool. Just so much fun. It's slow going, but it's a different style of driving.
Tons of torque.
Oh, yeah. Lots of torque,
Yeah.
Plenty of torque. But you could run faster than this thing accelerates. It's hilarious.
That's funny.
Yeah, but there's fun in that. It's a different style of fun. Everything doesn't have to be at Mach 1.
Sure. Yeah, exactly.
I've got a bunch of fraternity brothers that are all car guys and that most live in Michigan, and every year they do this drive down to Ohio where there's some amazing, amazing roads. If you live in Detroit, there isn't a turn there to save your life. I mean, it's flat, boring roads. So we drive about 3 hours south into Ohio, Marietta, Ohio, and they have the most amazing, amazing roads. And so the guys, everyone's got cool cars, and so I've been able to join them the last couple years. Last year, Auto Europe in Detroit lent me an Evora 400 and had a great time with that car. The year before that, my fraternity brother Raj lent me his '06 GT, so that thing was sweet. Really good car. A lot of power, a lot of torque, but proper GT, nice balance, and we were really going for it. Yeah.
Well, we can't talk Lotus without talking about the acronym. Lots of trouble, usually serious, is what many people say Lotus stands for. So I feel, if I could put words in your mouth, that you're kind of removing that acronym based on some of the products you're doing, right? Just for longevity purposes, for example.
Yeah, I mean, Lotus really made a big shift by putting in these Toyota motors into these cars. So the truth of the matter is they're actually pretty damn reliable. And I tell everyone this, keep your fluids fresh and nuts and bolts tight. And, if you let the oil warm up correctly, these cars can run. I mean, we have clients with 200,000 miles in these cars. We have one guy with 300,000 miles. So it's a Toyota, engine and transmission. They can last. Now you have to, you got to know how to heel and tow your downshifts if you want to, allow your transmission to hold up. But they are cars that can hold up really well. Our focus has been, how do you make it live on a racetrack? More so than longevity on the street per se. But we've done street longevity things as well. And plastic end caps on the stock radiators tend to crack. So we've got an all aluminum radiator that fixes that issue. It's the aftermarket it's much easier for us because our requirements are very narrow compared to an OEM engineer, because I've been there. I worked in that world, and an OEM engineer has to make a component that will work in Alaska and in the Mojave. It's got to work in the desert and in the coldest place on earth. And when a manufacturer sells a car, they've got to put a warranty on the damn thing too. And so these engineers are really given a much harder scope to meet with every component. In the aftermarket, we don't really give a rat's ass about Alaska, and we certainly don't really care about the desert.
Mojave, yeah.
Yeah, and so we. If we tell someone, okay, yeah, it's going to work, but you're going to have to rebuild it after 30 hours or 50 hours, well, that's just the nature of racing parts, right? And so, but having said that, things like our baffled oil pan is something that allows that engine, in these cars to live with track use. This car will pull over 1G with the tires that it comes with from the factory. I think at 1G, fluid will stand at like a 45-degree angle. And the stock oil pan in this car is not baffled. So that pickup is going to get starved and an engine will blow up. So with our baffling, we solve that issue. We've tested that up to like 1.7 Gs and it holds up. And so things like that we've done, certainly for track day longevity and durability, So but I always, again, if the fundamental car itself wasn't good, all of what we do, we're not making the proverbial silk purse out of a sow's ear. We started out with a pretty damn good product. And so we're just doing some little refinements. Track use is a completely different environment. And any of these manufacturers, they're and with the rise of track days, a lot of people have started to complain about track day problems that these cars that they buy have, and every manufacturer has been afflicted with that, whether it's Porsche or Ford, Mustang GTs, Corvettes, having issues, Lotuses, you name it, Ferrari, Lamborghini, everyone, because the track day environment is far more extreme, and building a car that's going to stay reliable to the expectation of the regular consumer is just unrealistic.
Right.
Totally unrealistic. But it's just the nature of where we're at. As the market changes, as it has, and track days have become so prevalent that in the past, you were in a racing organization and you kind of had a better understanding of the trade-offs of taking your car and putting it on a racetrack. Now people drive a car from the showroom straight to a racetrack and hammer it and think that the car should just hold up, because it's brand new, and that the manufacturer should cover the warranty when the car blows up. And
right.
So I think it's a bit unrealistic, unfortunately, but that's just the nature of where we live today.
Sure. I think the good news is if it's good enough for the track, it's probably good enough for the street.
That's for sure.
And it doesn't work the opposite way. Other than maybe slick tires, right? But not to get into a rabbit hole, but it's like if running, I can walk in my running shoes.
That's right.
So that's the good news.
Absolutely.
But one of the things I like to ask people are kind of the two questions of what has been the hardest part, and then the other one's what's the easiest part. But jumping ahead.
Yeah. The hardest part of being an entrepreneur, I assume, is what you're saying, right? Yeah, is the uncertainty. That's you have to be willing to live in the gray zone. We try to make everything black or white, but the truth of the matter is you have to live in that uncertain place. And it can be a very dark place for some people, right? Not knowing exactly, right? There's that saying, you eat what you kill. And if you haven't figured out the small business hustle, and that's how to make money by selling things that you've developed, then you're going to struggle. And so I find that to be still the hardest part. Is though I've sold millions of dollars worth of products and services, it's still that hard bit that you got to work on. And you really have to solve a real problem that's compelling enough that people are willing to, give up their hard-earned money to have. And so you have to prove to those, to those clients, And so yeah, I would say that's the hardest thing. The easiest thing is, for me, anyways, is probably somewhat related in that it's coming up with new ideas. I wake up in the middle of the night with ideas, and I still do. I have ideas constantly, and so that's good and bad, of course. Because you got to focus, of course. But with the coming up with ideas that I think are compelling, that I think people are interested in. I've created another little side business called Brand Assassins, and we're just we're like an ad agency doing strategic brand development for companies. I've created so many brands over the years that I've had friends and family ask me to help them, and I've done it for quite a few. And now I just realized, why don't I start charging, frankly, for this too?
I had a very similar conversation the other day about even just like personal style. I've got friends calling me all the time, and I'm like, I need to find a way to monetize this without being an asshole.
I know. It's a little frustrating. But Yeah, and you do it and you figure out some way to have some fun with that because it's not the main thing,
Right.
But I like the creative release from that, right? Because, again, coming back to the idea, well, it's easy for me, it's all these new ideas. And so, that's not something I'm going to spend, the majority of my time doing, but it's another creative release of a different way that I can help people. Because it's something that I feel, I'm reasonably good at.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Shinoo, this has been super fun, even to be here in the office looking out at all these like incredible vehicles. Clark Gable's Thunderbird, for example.
Yeah, the F-Bird. That thing's pretty cool. Very, very cool. Yeah. I look over my desk and I see all sorts of cool stuff. Cool cars, cool motorcycles, trucks. Yeah, it's a dream come true for a car guy for sure.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we can squeeze in a track day one of these days.
Absolutely.
All right.
I'm headed there on the 24th.
Oh, good to know.
All right.
All right. We'll see you soon.
All right, Wesley.
Thanks.
Take care.
Bye. Just want to thank Shinoo one more time for having me at the Black Shadow offices. The shop is borderline unreal. It's just super fun to walk around and see all the cars and memorabilia that he's got there. Really fantastic time, and they're doing some killer work. As always, thank you Clear Audio for the use of your headphones, as well as Jensen Reed and Super Beautiful for providing the theme music. As always, thank you so much for listening, and please don't forget to rate and review the podcast. It does help. Thank you so much, and I will catch you next week. Bye, everyone.